people. We want to keep it relatively small so that we can keep it valuable and keep the discussions going. But if you would like to join, please request through LinkedIn. Again, it's called the Engaged Learning Network. And just as a bit of background, this group, the network and the series that we're doing, the webinars, was co-created between the University of Illinois and a company called EduSourced. EduSourced is a company in the higher ed space. They provide an online tool to manage and streamline experiential learning programs. Here at Illinois, we're currently using the product, and it's been really nice to have to be able to centralize and streamline our experiential learning program. And I know some other universities are trying it out as well. The company's founder, David Comisford, he will be moderating the Q&A sections of the webinar today, so you'll get to hear from him. And ultimately, the reason we created this group and we're doing these series is because we're passionate about experiential learning, and we want to find ways to integrate it into the fabric of higher education. We're assuming that you're joining us today because you have that same interest, so we're glad to have you. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We do want to make this interactive today, so if you look at your screen, you should see a control panel and the ability to post a question. At any time during the webinar, feel free to post a question, and we'll address those throughout the webinar today. If for some reason we don't get to your question, we will post them on our LinkedIn group and continue the dialogue there. So like I said, we'd like to make this as interactive as possible. Like the last webinar, we are recording this webinar, and it will be a link will be provided on our LinkedIn group page as well as on the EduSourced website, so you should have access to it at that point, and you're welcome to share it with those around you. And then finally, at the end of this, after this webinar, we'll send out a brief survey topics that are of interest to the group. So let me introduce our speaker and presenter today. Her name is Michellana Jester, and she's a lecturer at the Global Economics and Management Group at the MIT Sloan School of Management in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And at Sloan, Michellana co-leads the school's largest action learning lab. It's called the G Lab. And part of her role is to drive the design and delivery of the course, as well as coordinating and managing the operational support of the lab. And she'll talk to us more about this. She's responsible for developing and supporting the learning objectives, and as coordinating the students, the clients, the faculty, and other stakeholders. Prior to Sloan, Michellana worked for a number of
lost my slides here, so let me just pull these up. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. All right. So thank you again, Andrew. It's very exciting for me to have the opportunity to speak with all of you and talk a bit about what we do at MIT Sloan, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you about the work that you're doing. As Andrew mentioned, we're all very passionate about the work that we do around this space, and for me, particularly the work that we do in action learning. What I propose to do today is to talk a bit about action learning, and then give an overview, talk very briefly about what we do at MIT Sloan, talk a bit about faculty and student engagement, and then talk a bit about the complexity of the international labs. And then I will we'll close that off with some Q&A, but just to let you know that we will do some pauses in between the different sections. So if you have questions as we're going through, please save those, and there will be breaks in between the different sections that we go through that will give you opportunity to ask questions. So just getting started. So I wanted to start off by sharing a story with you. a couple of years ago, I'm working with our Global Entrepreneurship Lab, G Lab, and and our labs are our shorthand for what we call our experiential learning courses at MIT Sloan. So I'm working with G Lab, and I get an email from one of our student teams. Our students have been working on campus from September through December, and then they travel on site in January, and that's for G Lab. I got an email from the students. Subject line said, "Mildly urgent, robbery." So you can imagine my shock when I saw this. It turns out that this team of students had landed in Jakarta, and traveling from the airport to the place where they were going to be staying, they made a stop, asked the driver to make a stop so they could pick up a few toiletries. And when they got back to the car, everything in their car all of their stuff was stolen. So their computers were stolen, their phones were stolen, everything was stolen. And the students were sending me an email letting me know about the robbery, and I loved the fact that they said mildly urgent robbery. But then they wrote another email immediately after that and said, "Professor Jester, we just want you to know that, yeah, we're really bummed out about losing all our photographs that were on our iPhones, but we want you to know that we are absolutely committed to having a great experience here in Jakarta. So we don't want you to worry. We're going to make this work, and we're going to have a good experience and do a good work for Sloan." Now, when I share this story, typically, sometimes I hear things like, "Well, wait a minute, you should have, better scoped the project, or you shouldn't have, maybe had students going in those locations." And we do have stories where things don't quite work out as students would imagine. But for me, this is what action learning means, and this is what it means in management education. Action learning sometimes is dismissed as this very simple, this simple idea, but it actually is very complicated, and certainly, for those of us that work in the space, you do see that. And it's what I like to refer to as the part B of the case. And the part B, in my mind, that's the real world. That's the piece that is ambiguous. That's the piece that's incomplete, and you don't really know about until you actually get on site. And Reg Revens coined this phrase, action learning, around sometime in the 1940s, and it was really this idea of people working together, comrades in adversity, what he liked to say. This idea of not just learning by doing, but learning by doing with others that are also learning by doing, and that really is so much, a key feature of what we do in our action learning work. If we look at one of the principles that Revan talks about, he said that learning must be equal to or greater than the rate of change. And so this idea that, especially now that we talk about, working in a complex business world, a complex global environment, we have to be able to, how do we, give our students, how do we give our managers in our businesses, the tools to help them learn equal to or faster than the rate of change, so that they are on the cusp and they're able to anticipate what's coming before them. And so the way that Revens thought about this, he said that learning has two elements. We have program knowledge and we have questioning insight. And so our program knowledge is the kind of knowledge that we find in books and with experts. And our questioning insight occurs when people, question themselves. They question experts. They question their assumptions. And if we think about our work at MIT, which we do, and we spend a lot of time, kind of thinking about, well, why are we doing this, and what does it mean for our students, and how does this help us enact our motto of developing principled, innovative leaders? When we think about this equation, what we want to think about is, how do we think about the ways in which we can really get our students, get our folks to decrease their reliance on experts, right? Because that's what they're used to. They're used to the sage on the stage, the person at the front of the room that's espousing their insight. We want this to be more student-centered. We want their experience and what they're learning. We want them to think about and think about what they're doing, as well as bringing their and think about it in the context of the work that they've done in the past. And so, how do we decrease the reliance on expertise but increase their questioning, their inquiry? And the way we thought about that is we're adding this component of reflection, so that through that we are getting students to become more self-aware, think about their leadership and how they show up, not only on the team, but think about this in the context of what they see when they're working on these projects out in the world, in the real world. And so, we certainly feel very strongly about the folks that we have here. We have a number of senior lecturers that have deep industry expertise. Those folks really play a role in helping us create the right, what Robert Keegan would refer to as the holding environment, for those of you that are familiar with Keegan's work. Creating this holding environment, so this is the space that we create for our students to question assumption, and again, to reflect on their own action, reflect on their experience in a way that helps them to develop into significant leaders. What that means for us as we think about MIT Sloan is that that action learning really for us is an approach to develop principled, innovative leaders through the integration of theory with real-world practice and personal reflection. This method is really meant to bring together faculty and students to tackle these real-world complex managerial challenges, and through this process, enhance students' leadership capabilities. And in many ways, as I shared with the story with the students who had all their things stolen, making good decisions with incomplete information, operating in ambiguity. That's really what is at the heart of the work that we do. So when we think about what action learning is at MIT Sloan, it is work on a real project or problem that leads to the creation of actionable recommendations for a sponsoring organization. And this is a way of mutual learning. So that is important, that there is learning going in both directions. It's an approach to learning with and through peers. It's a mean of providing personal and professional development through work on a real business challenge. It is a forum for developing and advancing integrated problem-solving skills. And note that I say problem-solving and not, and that's important, because one of the things that Reverence talks about is that we're not solving puzzles which have a clear answer. We're solving problems which can be a little murky. And it's a way to learn from action through reflection before, during, and after our project work. So by doing this, this is really meant to help us fulfill our mission to develop principled, innovative leaders. So, looking at the MIT Action Learning portfolio, currently Sloan has more than a dozen elective action learning opportunities within their degree program. These labs, which is what I mentioned earlier, is our shorthand for these experiential learning courses. These are electives, they are credit-bearing, and they're open to all graduate students. And through these experiences, we have teams of students. Typically, the teams are 4. They work on projects, and they are really tasked to blend knowledge from their core coursework, their prior professional work experience, as well as with whatever knowledge they learned within the classroom component of this work, to solve real-world problems for companies. And the other element of this is that this really pushes the students to be self-directed, and it pushes them to be self-motivated, because certainly with the challenges that we present within these labs, our sweet spot is finding something that's a little bit of a gap. So it's enough of a gap that it makes it interesting for the students, where they are having to bring all of their knowledge to bear on a challenge that's enough of a stretch that makes it interesting, but not too much of a stretch that they won't be successful on the projects and the work that they do. You will note that from these labs that some of them are focused on a particular area. So our China lab and our India lab would be examples of that. At one point we had a lab that was based at what we'll call Puerto Rico lab, and that was just based on projects that were based in Puerto Rico. And then we also have them focus on a particular topic. So you'll have analytics lab, our sustainable business labs, and our healthcare lab. These labs are, they are operating all year round. So some of these labs will happen in the spring, and some of them happen in the fall. Some of them have a travel component, and some of them do not have a travel component. The Sloan is always examining and taking a look at these labs to figure out, how best can we continue to enhance the experience for our students. Some of the, so we continue to make investments within Action Learning all the time. Relatively recently, we started the Action Learning Office, which I was a director for 4.5 years, and now have transitioned into a faculty position. And that office is fully staffed. But we also make other investments. For example, looking to make further investments in IT to figure out how can we better enhance the experience for both our faculty and the students in terms of capturing various bits of data. Looking to include undergrads. Currently, all the offerings that we have are targeted towards graduate students, but we are looking to how can we make these opportunities available for some of our MIT undergraduate students. And also, further diving into thinking about how do we think about our knowledge, improving our knowledge transfer and knowledge capture. So I want to pause here and see if there are any questions. I feel like I've gone through a lot of information. I want to just pause for an opportunity for anyone to ask questions.
And I'll jump in here real quick just so we're all on the same page. There are 2 ways to submit questions. So you can raise your hand if you would like to speak and ask Michellana a question directly, or you can enter a question in the question box and just type that in. And we have 2 here now, so we'll jump into that. And then if there are any additional questions, feel free to type those in throughout the presentation. And then as we pause, I'll be able to read those out and we can get an answer. So the first question, Michellana, is did you take existing courses and convert them into labs when the Action Learning program started, or did you start from scratch with all new courses?
Sure, that's a great question because the answer is yes. That is, some of the courses were developed from scratch, and some of them, for example, our enterprise management lab was essentially created from scratch. There was a market lab that was run, and it was a club group, but the faculty who was the advisor, the students, really there was a push for and a demand for this particular offering, and so the faculty worked to create a course that shifted from a focus on marketing, where marketing is a component of the enterprise management track course. And I'm going to actually go back so you can see the labs as I refer to them. So the M lab, the enterprise management lab, was something that was essentially created from scratch. Healthcare lab, another relatively recently organized lab, that was also a lab that was created from scratch. And our enterprise transformations in the digital economy, our T lab, that was actually an existing course that the faculty that had some project component to it, but the faculty modified that course to make it into a course that had that project component for all of the students within that section. So as I said, my answer was yes.
Okay, great. So follow up to that, for the ones which were created from scratch, about how long did it take to get the courses approved, and if you could provide any color to what that process was like?
Sure. So with the labs that were essentially created from scratch, it's been kind of a mix of both it's the students' interest. So the students may go to a faculty to say, I feel that we should have a lab on this particular domain area. Or it could be faculty saying, I really think that we want to have I think we can have a lab based on this. And let me just pause and say that there are courses at Sloan that have project components that aren't under this umbrella. They operate slightly differently. So we have lots of experiential learning courses at Sloan, but the ones that fall under this umbrella I'll focus on here. So the faculty essentially get some data to say, based on student interests, it may be a club, a student club that approaches, or the faculty may reach out to a student club saying, do you think that there'd be a student interest in a project-based learning course that looks kind of like this? And from that, they present a proposal to the dean's office, our deputy dean, and that goes in front of the teaching planning committee, which is made up of both the executive directors and deans at Sloan, and they talk about it, and basically the faculty present a case to say, here's why I think that this would be a good lab, and here's the evidence that we see that this would be of interest to our students. So it tends to be generated that way. Some of these labs, faculty will go on sabbatical. There are two labs that are not that were part of action learning for a bit, but have kind of cycled out. That could be decreased interest. Faculty research may change. So there are many different factors that will cause them to cycle out. But certainly, in terms of the ones that are here, there are tenured faculty that are connected to all of these, and so they really drive these, the action learning portfolio, as well as student interest.
Okay, great, thanks. And the next question is, how many students are enrolled in each lab?
Typically, the labs will have as few as maybe 24 students. So there was, so our healthcare lab, because of what's required, the labs may run a bit small, and that may be by design, that there's a intensive learning component that the faculty are looking to have, and so they can run relatively small. However, most labs are somewhere in the neighborhood of 40-ish, 40, 42 students. However, our China and India lab, which are run together, that's 86 students that are in those two labs, 52 in China lab, 20-something odd that will be in India lab, and those, as I said, those two are run at the same time. G Lab, which is our global entrepreneurship lab, is the largest, and that's the one that I am a co-faculty lead for. And there were 64 students in that lab last year. So G Lab is the largest, and will run somewhere in the neighborhood between 148 to 160 plus each year.
Okay, and the next question is, how many programs are you drawing from with the context that you mentioned these labs are open to all graduate students, and it sounds like graduate students only?
Sure. So, and we'll talk a bit about this a bit later, but it's the Sloan has their MBA program, their traditional 2-year MBA program, and most of the students that participate in the labs will come from the MBA program. We also have students that are dual degree students, so they are Kennedy School students. They may be students that are part of our leading global operations, which are students that are getting Masters in Engineering as well as MBA students. So we have those dual degree students that will participate in the labs. We have a Masters of Finance course. We have a Masters of Science, and Sloan Fellows, which is our mid-career program, and then our Executive MBA program. Sloan's total student enrollment is about 1,100. Our MBA program enrolls about 430 to 450 each year, so relatively small for as compared to some of the other business schools.
Okay, we have a couple other questions, but I think in the interest of time, we ought to progress forward, and then we will revisit those additional questions at the end.
Okay, absolutely. Great. So I'm going to use this slide to talk a bit about our faculty and student engagement, and what I will do is start at the number 23 bubble, or the orange bubble, and then just kind of work my way across, heading right. So when we talk about action learning and we say it's about 23 years, and we kind of have that in quotes, certainly we have to think and appreciate the fact that the Sloan School of Management began in 1914 as part. It was called Course 15, and it was part of the School of Engineering, and very much aligned with being a part, our taproots being part of engineering, as well as MIT and their motto, mens et manos, hand in mind. This idea of closely relating our subject, the subject matter, to practical industrial problems, and giving the students practical experience. It is not surprising that, from my perspective, that action learning has been has become so much a part of the MIT Sloan experience. When we think about the history of action learning at MIT Sloan, again, the roots can, we see go back to 1964. Professor Ed Roberts had a course called Applications and Implementation of Industrial Dynamics. And students worked with local companies in the Cambridge-Boston area, building system dynamic models of company problems for senior management. Now, part of the reason why, so we have a long history of doing this kind of learning, project-based learning work. However, part of the quotes is that the action learning model that has become dominant at MIT Sloan emerged about 1992 through Entrepreneurship Lab, ELAB. And it was a course that connected our Sloan students with students from the engineering school, from other parts of the MIT campus, with an on-site experience working with high-tech startups in and around the Boston area. And from ELAB, we launched our Global Entrepreneurship Lab, GLab, which has now become, as I said, the largest of our action learning offerings at Sloan. And certainly the 16 plus labs that have, labs have kind of emerged out of that, of those roots. As I mentioned before, we do have, our school is relatively small, so when we think about the number of countries that we've been involved in, 68, the number of projects, over 1,000, this is very much meant to illustrate that this type of work is very much a part of our, very much a part of the Sloan experience. In very recent data that, when we take a look at why students decide to come to MIT Sloan, about 60% of them will say that, one compelling reason for them in their interest in Sloan is the action learning work, the work that the students get to do with with companies around the world. And that, I think, says a lot about what we do and why. We will recruit over 175 projects each year. So there's a lot of work that goes into that, because we do have to meet the student demand in that way. We've had about more than 5,000 students that have participated in labs, and not surprisingly, part of how we get to such a high count is essentially most students that come to Sloan will participate in the lab. The number you see here, 80% of the students will participate in one of the lab courses. Now, I will also just remind you that these are elective courses. These are not courses that the students have to take. There's a considerable amount of work that's involved. We tell the students to estimate anywhere from 8, 10 to 12 hours a week per person. And again, these are on teams of usually 4. It's a significant amount of work, but the students really find this experience, again, remarkable and very much a part of their experience. So they, really look to this opportunity when they come to Sloan. Because of the way that the MBA core is designed, the students can participate in more than one of these labs. So our current data suggests that at least 60% of the students participate in 2 or more labs. We have some students who, in fact, have completed 5 lab courses, and they lovingly refer to themselves as lab rats. So yes, so this is, for some students, they say this is the way that we learn best, and this is what we want as part of our experience. And so they will, take as many lab courses as they can. And they, as I said, they can take 2 at any time. Many students will take a lab that has a travel component and a lab that does not have a travel component at the same time. A lot of work, but as I said, for some students, they feel that this is the way that we learn best. The number of faculty that are involved, you can imagine that with 16 of these project-based learning courses that there are a lot of faculty involved. There is a tenured faculty that is associated with each one of the lab courses, and we also utilize our wonderful senior lecturers who have deep industry experience and really work very closely and help the students connect the theory that they're learning in the classroom with what it's like to think about this in a real world context. Our senior lecturers are part of what makes the work that they do so powerful is that because we insist that the students own the relationship with these companies, that they take the lead, the faculty play a role as essentially a coach in the background, but they also were there to advise the students, guide the students. Again, they're creating this holding environment to help them think about and kind of push them on some of the tough questions and challenge their assumptions. In addition, these faculty, again, these senior lecturers will connect the students with their network. So the folks that, if they've worked for many years in energy, they may connect them with folks in the energy industry outside of the institute. So that's wonderful. All of the labs have a part of their work with the various people that are involved. They have these meetings once a week, so we call them teaching team meetings. So all the faculty, senior lecturers, and the tenured faculty that are involved in the labs will meet once a week, anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour or more. But it's an opportunity for basically building a community to share. I'm having trouble with this kind of thing with this team. And what do you think about this? Or, I had this wonderful breakthrough with this other team, and sharing that with the group. So it does foster a sense of community. And in addition to each of the labs having their own teaching team meeting, through the Action Learning Office, the Action Learning Office organizes what they're called the operations meeting, and that brings all of the faculty and staff that are involved with that run these Action Learning Labs together once a month to, again, share best practices, share challenges. And part of the work that the Action Learning Office does is to listen in to hear if there are any particular challenges that seem to spread across all the labs. And they work to figure out ways, is this something that we can do to help support all the labs address a particular issue. So lots of different ways that, again, that the faculty, the tenured faculty, as well as the senior lecturers that support this work are involved. Number of labs, as I said, we have 16, and again, as we discussed earlier, these are all driven by the interest both of the faculty and of the students. So I want to pause again. So there was a lot of information on that one slide, and check in and see if there are any questions, or maybe some questions from before that are relevant to what I just spoke to now. David?
Hey, Michellana, thank you. So the first question is, what are some examples of how you, oh, sorry, I'm reading from the wrong line. How do you solicit and vet student projects, and how do you maintain the quality of student experiences? And I'll add a little bit of context to that. So I think you're dealing in a very mature program. You've got deep relationships with a lot of the organizations you're working with, I would imagine. If you could also add maybe some advice for someone who's looking to launch a program or grow a small or newer program, I think it's a very different question they would have around how do we get in touch with employers and really get started.
Sure. So, I would say that, particularly for some of our newer labs, they're essentially launching themselves. I think that, MIT Sloan has continued to make investments. So as I think I mentioned, or I mentioned the Action Learning Office, which is a huge support, and they help to disseminate best practices either through this through these monthly meetings, as well as reaching out to support labs that are just starting. But we do rely on relationships that the faculty might have outside of MIT. So some faculty will do some consulting or do some speaking engagements, and during that time, as they are meeting people, they will reach out and connect with them. And that's one way that that helps us source projects. We also rely on alumni, you know, particularly alumni who are familiar with our lab work. They have a very good sense as to what we are looking for, and so they, you know, when they see things or folks out in the world, they will, you know, forward them, you know, vet them somewhat, and then kind of forward them on to us so that we can do a deeper vetting of these host companies. It is a significant investment of time. So I mentioned earlier that we recruit about more than 175 projects for all the different labs each year. And this is a mix of, within each lab, you have faculty that are recruiting. It is a year-long process because it's not just recruiting for that particular time. It's recruiting for companies that may not be ready to participate in the lab right now. It may be 2 years from now. I've actually had a number of conversations with some, you know, some companies that are fairly new in being, and it's probably going to be about 2 or 3 years before they be a good project for us. But we will continue being connected with them and continue that relationship so that when they are ready, that we are there to kind of welcome them in. We do work with organizations, for an example, with Endeavor. Endeavor Global is an organization that works with entrepreneurs in emerging markets all over the world. And through that relationship with Endeavor, particularly if they're countries in Latin America, mostly in Latin America, but also kind of branching out into Middle East and in Southeast Asia, if there are areas, countries that we're particularly interested in, we can connect with Endeavor to say, you know, are there any good companies that you think would be, you know, a good fit for, say, G-Lab or one of our other labs? And so they you know, have been very gracious to help us. For us and for Endeavor, it's a win-win because they get to, it's a resource for them. They're working with entrepreneurs in emerging market economies. They're helping them to scale, and they're looking for you know, various tools and resources to help them do that. And then from our side, we have students that are really interested in working on projects that can be implemented, recommendations that can be implemented, and in that way they are able to work with, we are able to get recommendations from Endeavor and work with them and add those to the companies that we ultimately work with. We do get quite a bit of publicity as well, so word of mouth is also a way that we get projects, and then students will say, you know, I heard of this really interesting project. You know, can we look into possibly working with them, and we work that way as well.
Are clients paying a fee to participate in these labs?
So that's a great question. So it depends, and we don't. It's not a fee per se. For the labs that do not have a travel component, there is no cost for them to be involved. So the students aren't going anywhere. They're working remotely. I mean, they're basically they're working on campus the entire time, and so there's no cost with respect to travel. For the projects that have a travel component, we do ask the host companies to cover round-trip economy airfare and the students' lodging on site. Some companies will do more, so they'll cover ground transportation, they'll cover, say, you know, students' food expenses while they're on site, but that's not required from our side. We do tell the students that there is, for the projects that have a travel component, that there is some cost, out-of-pocket cost involved, and that could be anywhere from $700 to $1,000, depending on what the students choose to do and how they choose to manage their time on site. But that's, for the most part, that's the extent of what the cost is for the company. And so we will tell them to budget anywhere from $10,000 to $14,000 for a team of 4, and that tends to cover, again, as I said, the round-trip airfare and the lodging for 3 weeks on site. We, you know, ask for safe and reasonable lodging. We don't ask for the students to be put up in, you know, 4 or 5-star hotels, but just more often than not, that means that the students are being lodged in a more local space, and that's important because we want the students to have the experience of being immersed in the local culture.
Yeah, it's great. you mentioned what sounds like a channel partner with Endeavor to help reach these international small, medium enterprises. So that's one approach. Are there any other approaches you've taken to reach this market?
Well, so with that at MIT, we do have, for example, you know, digital business media. So we have these different centers on campus, and for some of the labs, they do draw from those centers for their projects. And that's another avenue by which they draw projects.
Okay. We've got a couple other questions. We'll go ahead and move it forward and kind of address those at the end, if that makes sense.
Sure. Okay. Very good. So I'm going to switch a bit and talk a bit about the international program, the international component of the work that we do, and I did, you know, talk a bit about that in terms of the costs that are involved. In thinking about the international piece, you know, I always like to say that this caveat that, as I'm sure with many of you, you know, Sloan is an international program, so we do have students from all over the world. About 40% of our MBA students are international students. So it is not unheard of to have a team that is comprised of all international students working on a project that's in a country that no one has, you know, worked in before. So that adds a whole other multiple layers of complexity in that. The international components of our labs are kind of split into two buckets. We have our international that do not have a travel component, so that's, you know, for example, our S Lab. The students work on site, at Sloan on the projects for the entire time, so their connection with their host company is virtually. But we also have projects that have a travel component. For the projects that happen in the spring, they're on site for 2 weeks, and for the projects that start in the fall, the students are on site in January for 3 weeks. What is unique, I think, more than the students going on site to just be immersed in a particular country, to have this cultural immersion, the international component of the labs that do have this travel component, the travel piece is meant to help align the learning that's meant for the particular lab. So I list these 6 as just examples. For G-Lab, our Global Entrepreneurship Lab, the target is emerging market economies in Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa, Middle East. And by targeting small to medium enterprises, that allows the students to work very closely with the entrepreneurs. So they're working very closely with the decision makers, and it's meant for them to think about their leadership, think about leadership in an emerging market, and make those connections as they are working on their team to help this entrepreneur work on their particular business challenge. China Lab is unique within our portfolio. It is the only lab that we have that partners 2 students from Sloan with 2 students with one of our 5 partner universities in China. So not only are the students having to work virtually with their teammates in China, but they're working with a fairly local Chinese company. And you know, so the students are managing, you know, multiple layers of complexity, both you know, managing their work with their teammates, managing the work with their particular company, and particularly with the Chinese students, Chinese university students being on site. That presents a whole other level of challenge, but you know, that's what makes it interesting for the students that are you know, participating in that particular lab. GoLab looks at horizontal and vertical integration issues. Those teams are a bit smaller. That's our executive MBA students. They work in teams of 6, and they work with companies that have multiple location sites. So they split up into groups of 2 or 3 to work on those different sites, and then come back together to talk about the vertical or horizontal integration challenges of that particular organization. Our India lab, they are particularly looking at issues that are particularly uniquely challenging for India around poverty, healthcare, those kinds of issues. And so there's a partnership with MIT's Tata Center where they're working with PhD engineering students typically to work on projects in India. LLab, our leading sustainable systems lab, our multi-stakeholder engagement opportunities, and then our study tours is also, again, very unique for Sloan in that it is, if of the 16 opportunities that we have, the students feel that there's something else that they want to do, they can work on designing their own, essentially, project-based learning opportunity. They will design the syllabus, they design, the content, the course content with a faculty support, and they recruit students for that, and they do all the organizing for the on-site for that particular work. So again, it's uniquely challenging and a wonderful opportunity for the students. When we think about the challenges of managing the international programs, certainly with the student engagement, so matching the right team with the right project, particularly as the students are going to be traveling on site. They want a stronger voice in choosing their teammates. For the most part, we do give them a strong voice, but we do a little bit more push on what we're looking for in the labs that don't have a travel component. For the travel component, we let them have a larger voice, and we do want them to make good decisions about that. But again, it's we want to make sure that they pick the right team and match that with the right project for the work that they're going to be doing on site. And we do play a very strong role in making sure that that happens by they do pick their teammates, but ultimately the final decision about the project match is from the faculty. The cultural instruction, we do rely on other parts of MIT to support us in that. We do have some programs that are run pure international programs, and so we may get some materials from them to support us, but we do also rely on connecting students with folks who are part of the Sloan community to have them help them think through what the experience is like when they get on the ground. We do also have the students connect with students that have worked there in the past to get their perspective on what working in those particular countries might be like for them. With respect to the program objectives, thinking about the desired outcome, certainly the ambiguity is increased when the students are traveling remotely. The way that they understand the project when they're at Sloan is very different than what they find out when they get on site, and being able to help them manage that, being able to help them think about what the outcome of that would be, can be a bit challenging. So we do try our best to make sure that we are mindful of that. Staffing, again, high intent, high resource, a lot of work. GLab, just as an example, has there are 2 lead faculty, there are 10 senior lecturers in support, as well as 2 teaching assistants and a host of administrative assistants that help support that lab. And GLab is the largest with 160 plus students. So high staff use, high intense resource use. With respect to sponsors and projects, we've talked a little bit about that, relying on our networks as well as for our alumni. And in terms of managing expectations, we want to ensure going forward that that the students' expectation as well as the company's expectations are the same. And there's a lot of work that happens with between our Action Learning Office as well as with the faculty that are supporting the students to make sure that we kind of continuously check in on that. And sometimes that can require some intervention on the part of the faculty that are connected. Risk management is a particularly significant issue for us because we, again, push the students to own the relationship with the host company. We also typically do not travel with the students when they're on site. So they're traveling internationally. We do have points of check-in where they are to check with the faculty mentor that they're working with, but all in all, they're essentially on their own when they're out. The Action Learning Office is on call for 24 hours while the students are traveling. So if they run into any difficulty, there is someone there that can be reached by Skype, by text message, or by phone. We are testing out some apps that will help us better locate where students are in the world, and that they can connect with us if they run into any difficulties or challenges. We are on the State Department high-risk list, so if anything happens while the students, before they get there or while they're on site, we can work to move them immediately. But as I said, certainly this risk management piece is important and a particular challenge for anyone that's running an international program. So, David, I will pause again for questions.
Yeah, thanks. So I know managing the interpersonal dynamics of a team is kind of a struggle for programs across the board, international or not. So with international projects where the student teams are placed internationally but don't have the faculty on hand, what's your approach to managing those dynamics? Is it just entirely left up to the team, or is there a hands-on approach?
So it's not so much hands-on. So we do have a go no go point at the right before they're supposed to travel, and it's really I'll use GLab as an example. We will sit in a meeting and basically go through and have all of the faculty mentors that are working with the team say, do you feel that your team is ready to travel? And so they will make the call whether or not we feel that, and again, this kind of gets to the interpersonal issues. Do we feel that there are interpersonal issue challenges that we need to address? We do try to get at a lot of that beforehand, so we have lots of reflection and check-ins along the way before they actually leave, and we really do stress that all the students are smart enough to figure out how to do a good job on all these projects. Typically, what will derail a project is the interpersonal dynamics, and so that's what we want you to pay a lot of attention to. So we do that work. We do have the students check in at least once a week while they're on site. They will do some blog work where it's meant to be blogging / reflective as on site. But that's how we try to catch some of that beforehand. That's not to say that it doesn't happen. Every once in a while we do have that. We do have teams that kind of break apart. And when that does happen, we really do try to push the students to say, okay, you had this challenge. How do we mine that experience for what the learning is? What are the lessons that come out of that? And how do you think about that going on to whether it be your next project or your next milestone or your next course at Sloan?
Okay, great. And again, in the interest of time and moving forward, we'll go ahead and go to the next section. We have a few questions lined up for the end that have come in. If anyone has any additional questions, feel free to submit those. If we don't have time to get to them, we can address them after the webinar too, so don't be shy about that.
Great. And essentially, I just have two more things that I wanted to share. When the students talk about their experience in the lab courses, they'll say things about the capstone of their 2-year program, about how grateful they are for the opportunity, how the work was enriching, it was an incredible experience. But more often than not, the essence of what they're saying, and they sometimes even use these words, the experience was transformative for them, that it really just changed the way that they thought about themselves, thought about how they show up as on a team. For some people, it does change what they think about what they may want to do long term. So in many ways, it's we have these aspirations of what we're hoping for to come out of this in terms of the learning piece, our objectives for learning, but the students are also coming into this work with their own learning objectives, and this transformation piece oftentimes is the piece that is a bit of a surprise, but is the piece that it really is is significant in their Sloan experience. And then the last piece is just touching on the host company reflections. Overall, the companies, we have about 30% of the companies that work with us will come back again. We have some companies that we've worked with. You're not limited to working with one particular lab, and you're not limited to working with one lab in a particular year. We have some companies that will work with multiple labs within a year and over multiple years, so you're not limited in that way. But more often than not, what the stories that I love to hear from our host companies is about the residual, about the you know, not no so yes the projects, but you know, but the residual impact that the students had while they were on site, and it's the, you know, not helping them to think about things differently, the knowledge transfer opportunity, the ways that they got them to think about their vendors or their customers or even the folks within their organization differently. And I think that that's what you know, is always very exciting for us to see, that that the impact is more than just the project piece, that it's much broader than that. So I will close with that, and we can just open it up to any questions in the time that we have remaining.
Sure. Can you talk about some examples of how you incorporate student reflection into the labs, and do the students always seem engaged, or is that a challenge to get them to reflect?
That's a great question. You know, so you know, MBA students, you know, somewhat reflexively, you know, may, you know, poo-poo reflection, but we do try to incorporate it in a way that it's not something that's stapled on to the end, but that's something that we touch on all throughout the process of their lab experience. Some labs have a stronger incorporation of this than others. Peter Senge's lab, Leading Sustainable Systems, is the students spend a day and a half with the companies before they start on the project work, in this you know, pretty intense reflective process where they talk about the language that they're going to be using and how they're going to work together, and they reflect throughout their experience through papers and a small group work. And then at the end of their experience, they come back from their on-site, because it's a travel component, but they will come back and spend a day and a half talking about their experience as well, and kind of in debriefing and reflecting on that experience. We have tried having the students do blogs, video blogs, as well as just, you know, straight written blogs, as a way to getting them to reflect, and we use prompt questions to get them to reflect. And sometimes we go as far as to not use the term reflection, you know, lest we have that, you know, that visceral, you know, negative reaction. But we do those things to really push. And you know, one of the things that we find is that for the students that have done more than one lab, they tend to be more open to talk about and reflect on their experience. And we love having so many students, and I think I might have mentioned earlier that with the MBA core, they're able to complete a lab in their first semester spring. So then in their, when they come back as second year students, they will take a, you know, most of them will take another lab or two. And what's great about it, because they've already been through one, we love the fact that we can say to them, so drawing on your experience in China lab or India lab or in global health lab, you know, can you talk a bit about, you know, what you've got out of that experience and how that experience will be different than this experience. And so where we do get them to pull that through, and then also think about how they will incorporate this into their work in the future. So we do ask those kinds of questions. And so they're small group work, they're papers, but certainly you know, we do have things that we ask them to tack back to looking at, like their learning objectives throughout the time that they are participating in the lab. But certainly to some extent, all the labs have this reflective component, and for the most part, it's usually small group discussion as well as written.
Okay, that's great. And we have a couple additional questions, but I think in the interest of time, let's go ahead and close this out. And then once the hour is up, I'll go through and read those 3 additional questions. And if anybody on the line has time to stay on, and if you have other ideas, thoughts, questions, we'll take those at the end.
Okay, so I'm sorry, go ahead,
yeah,
David.
go ahead. No, go ahead, Michellana.
I was just going to say that for those of you that are signing off, we'll make the slides available, but we will, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions directly. My email address is there. The folks at Action Learning would be happy to connect with you, so I left their information is there as well. And I will turn it over to David.
Yeah, thank you, Michellana, for the presentation, and thanks everybody for attending. You know, it's always exciting for me to see the community form a little bit more and to be able to share these ideas. And the bit of a part we get to play in that is I think, great. So thank you all for participating. Again, the recording will be available next week at edusource.com. It will also be in the Engaged Learning Network group on LinkedIn, so you can request to join that if you're not already a member, if you want to have access to this webinar as well as invites to future webinars that we'll have. I'd like to thank Andrew Allen as well for helping to put this together, and appreciate everybody's time. And part of the way, you know, as a company at EduSource, part of the way that we get to learn and provide value to our clients is understanding what you all are going through and trying to, you know, get our arms around what's difficult and what's challenging in running these programs. So this is interesting to us on that front as well. To that end, for those of you I haven't already met, I'll be reaching out over the next couple weeks and asking for a call to see if I can get to know your program a bit. So thank you all so much for coming, and we hope to see you at future webinars. And Michellana, if
yes.
you have time to stay on, we have a couple
Absolutely.
additional questions.
Sure.
Okay, so one question came in was, what collaboration tools are you using for students to share information, files, etc., with the faculty or the clients?
Sure. So we use a number of different things. That's actually a good question. We've been talking a lot about that. We have some things that we, you know, certainly the students are always bringing in, you know, their own tools and things that they use. So Google Groups and those things. The students have used things like Basecamp, for example. We use GoToMeeting. We use BlueJeans, and we use those and have those available, make those available to the students to use at Sloan. So they have access to that as students at MIT. And you know, of course, the students will use Skype and those kinds of things. One of the things that a few of the students tested this past year is using WhatsApp, and as a way of connecting. So you know, we do make suggestions to them in terms of what to use. For example, we say, you know, Skype is, you know, at a bare minimum because the quality sometimes is not very good for those kinds of interactions. It can be unpredictable. So we do ask. So they, you know, we do kind of push them into other collaborative tools. As I said, you know, they've used Basecamp, Google Groups, BlueJeans, GoToMeeting, and things like that.
Okay, and the last question we have is, getting faculty on board is a major obstacle for a lot of folks. So how did you initially get them interested, especially with the international piece and any additional responsibility that goes along with that? And the follow-up to that is, are there any incentives involved with getting faculty to make a commitment? Right.
So, you know, interestingly enough, and I do, you know, I do think that this is you know, something that's very unique. So I'll answer this in two, you know, kind of in two parts. One is that I do think that because of Sloan's history and that so many of our faculty come from MIT, that this is learning in this fashion is something that they're accustomed to, and so this is the way that they learned, and so they are incorporating that into their classroom. So it's not a new type of learning and work for them. So they're doing it because that's the way that, you know, that they learned. With respect to the faculty engagement, I have to say that it is it's the leadership from our deans. It's the senior leadership from the deans, not only Dave Schmidtline, but all the associate deans and executive directors. There's quite a bit of energy and attention that is paid to this, and there's a significant commitment made to this type of work. Are the faculty given special incentives? No, they're not. They do this because they enjoy doing this, and it is supported by the senior leadership. The deans do meet to say, and the faculty will make their request. I feel that we need this for our lab, and this is the way that I feel that we can best be supported in the lab. And from the dean's perspective, this is how they are organizing to help support the faculty run their courses in this way, because again, it's the commitment from Sloan and from the senior leadership. to organize these courses in this way.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michellana. And those are the last of the questions. So what we will do after the session is we'll type out the questions and we will post them to the ELN group on LinkedIn. So any of you can access them there. And you're also welcome to post additional questions, which Michellana can answer from the LinkedIn group. So thank you all so much for your time. I hope this was a helpful session, and we'll take care and have a great afternoon.
Great. Thank you so much.